Chapter 5. From a scrub-covered rise, the binoculars of Front Commander Letrong moved slowly across the land below. Before him lay the town of Quảng Trị, silent, breathing faintly beside the Thạch Hãn River. The river in this season was low, like a gray-green sash laid across houses, fields, roads, villages, then drifting lazily out toward the I2 estuary. The harbor, once bearing the gentle name Mother and Child, was now black with long-barreled cannons, warships hunched as if ready to surge in and plow the land. Letrong's sleepless eyes paused for a long time on the thin Thạch Hãn bridge. No vehicles, no people. His gaze moved to the citadel, walls battered and exposed. He lowered the glasses and said, half to himself, half to his aide, "The citadel, Tribu, Non-Bu, Triton. One day all these names will go into history. Militarily, no one holds such a place, but politically, strategically, we are forced to hold it, as long as possible. This is the decisive point of the whole campaign. We may win, we may lose, but the price will be very dear." The aide scribbled. Letrong's eyes were bloodshot but clear. "So we keep it," he said. "And we must be ready to pay." Wind combed the brush. The commander raised the glasses again. "Another pontoon raft," he murmured. "They will cross tonight." That night the guns came close. Flares lit the ruins chalk white, then darkness dropped again. Between bursts, men crossed. The river tilted under their weight. In the trench, Kong pressed his ear to the earth and listened under the roar, for the breath he had once heard leaning against a banyan in the botanical gardens. An ancient, steady breath that never changed. It was there, beneath the thunder. After midnight, in a lull, a voice whispered, "Kong?" He turned. A young woman in a brown scarf stood above him, dust on her blouse, her hands steady. "Tan." She unwrapped an oilcloth bundle, a bent saxophone mouthpiece, a strip of brass, a torn manuscript in his own hand. "Carry this vow," she said. "If the notes return, I will hear them." His throat closed. "You should not be here." "Nor you," she said. "Yet here we are." They stood for a moment under flares breaking the sky black and white. Then she was gone, moving into darkness like a line of script. At dawn the squad shifted. From their ridge they saw flooded paddies, Dong Ha's blurred hump beyond. Smoke lay across the flats, so thin and even no one would believe a painter who tried. Under that calm, machines crawled, spat fire, broke the ground. "War is sometimes an orderly man," Sen said, "with rulers and ledgers." "Then we'll be the crooked scrawl in his margin," Ta answered. The order came. "Hold this line, but send scouts." Ta looked down the row. Kong, Bin. They crawled through sharp grass, oily water. A flare popped absurdly in daylight. A machine gun probed for them like a blind finger. At a low wall they pressed their chests, looking out at a burned truck in the road, and farther, a small pagoda with its bell tower collapsed, the bell split and silent. "Remember this," Bin whispered. "If we don't, no one will." On the way back, Quang saw a boy face down in water, sugarcane still in his teeth. He reached. Bin caught his wrist. "No, if he belonged to someone, he returns in their way. If to no one, then to the river." "He belonged to a mother," Quang said. Then say her name softly, Bin told him, and keep moving. By afternoon, they were back under the shredded tree. A runner brought a tin of condensed milk and 6 spoons. They dipped one by one. The sweetness hurt their jaws, brought tears. So this is how the rich live, Hai joked. The laughter had not faded when the shells struck short. The ridge heaved. Soil showered. A stone rang off Ta's helmet. "Reverse slope!" he shouted. They slid over while the crest was chewed bare. The tree was now a stump. Bin looked at the sketch where the tree still stood, then closed the page softly, like closing a child's eyes. "Tonight we fetch what we need," Ta said evenly. "No shovelheads left. We'll find some. Sen, write our names. A man should not be nameless." They went down in pairs. The valley lay under dust. They moved quietly, taking a shovel, a coil, a canteen, leaving the rest. Quang paused over a body thin as punctuation. He touched the relic at his chest and steadied. Voices came, Vietnamese, not theirs. A patrol passed, clean helmets, boots shining. They slid into a furrow, held their breath. A young officer lingered, gazing at the ruined fields as if at a map he could not read. He bent, picked up a brown scarf smelling faintly of herbs. He tucked it under his breast flap and walked on. Bin shuddered. He looked like an actor after the lights go out. "The lights are out everywhere," Quang said. Near midnight they returned with 2 shovel heads, wire, a kettle, canvas. They dug until their wrists burned. Ta touched each shoulder. "Still breathing?" A nod, a blink. "Good." Tomorrow again, Quang raised the bent mouthpiece and blew. A ghost note hung above the trench. Down in the ruins, Tan paused, tilted her head, as if she had heard. She smiled without knowing. Elsewhere, the young officer lifted a bucket for a wounded man while Tan steadied the cup. Their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. "Thank you," he said. "Here I still have people to carry," she replied. She lifted the stretcher pole. He took the other end. Together they bore the weight. At the doorway he hesitated, as if to speak a name he did not have. The night closed over it. Toward dawn the ridge was quiet, unbelievably. The squad dozed. The boy's head rested on Hai's shoulder. Sen wrote 6 names and the date on the back of a label, so someone might know they had been. The sun rose pale. The river below was dull steel. Dong Ha was a rumor. Between banks, life and death made their exchange. "Eat," Ta said. "Dry rice and a story." "What story?" Tu asked. "The story where we cross and return," Ta said. "One day we'll tell it, old. Today we live it young." They ate, strapped on packs, lifted rifles, breathed. The day began. Elsewhere, Quang sat on a motorbike, a map on his knee. The girl stood before him, her eyes steady until he squinted as if dazzled. He smiled bitterly. "As you wish." I've never met anyone who looked at me like that. Because of that look, I hope we meet again. And also hope we never meet as enemies across a line, if war doesn't chew me up first. Take care. Goodbye. He left the bike, vaulted across the road, leapt into the burned woods, his tall, supple figure flickering like a wild animal returning to its unit. The girl frowned, watching. His silhouette vanished suddenly, like a mirage. She shook her head slightly, not understanding. Chapter 6. Artillery thrust out foul red tongues, licking the ragged scrub forests along the Thạch Hãn. Shells fell straight into the river's heart. Trees burst into flame. Water leapt skyward. The sky bruised red. The earth heaved. Everything shook and shattered, as if announcing that the most momentous and most brutal time in the history of this land, in the history of this long war, was about to arrive. But that was still ahead, still hidden in the inferno of 81 days and nights that Ta's six-man squad could not yet imagine. How could they? They were still carefree, innocent, tinged with a little romance, excited like young birds about to spread their wings into a stormy, majestic sky. When the shelling came, they ducked into dugouts. When it stopped, they climbed out and returned to their simple work. Boiling rice, cutting brush, digging earth, ferrying ammunition, laying out stretchers and carrying the wounded. The long campaign had stripped away their novice awkwardness. Their hands moved neatly, their steps were quick, their eyes bright and sure. They no longer squabbled over trifles. They had learned to share one cigarette, one sip of water, a spoonful of condensed milk. They took turns sleeping. They took turns standing watch. When fear rose, they swallowed it. When homesickness burned, they clenched their teeth and smiled with their eyes. Each man kept one small thing at his breast: a photo, a stub of pencil, a scrap of music, a dented mouthpiece. There was a quiet pride in being six and being one. The river lay there, deceptively mild. In daylight it looked like a gray-green sash. At night it darkened to iron. Flares turned it white like tin. Then the dark returned, thick as felt. Boats nosed out soundlessly, paddles wrapped, rope ready. A word, a nod, knees touched. The boat slid. Halfway across, the water seemed to tilt under the weight of men. Sometimes the shells fell into the water itself. Cold fountains rose. The river trembled. A boat broke open. Men vanished without a cry. Ropes flew from Ta's hands. Two clutched. A third slipped away as if something deep had taken his ankle. "Keep the rhythm," Ta breathed. The paddles found it again. The bank rose, steep and slick. They clawed and were over. They dug with mess tins and helmets until spare shovel heads could be found. They lined the trench with planks levered from ruined houses. They strung wire, draped canvas, learned to lie flatter than shadows. They mapped the ground by touch, this hollow, that hummock, this broken wall, that lone stump of a tree. A man blindfolded might have run it with his eyes shut. Day by day they changed. The softness left their faces. The bones showed. Their talk grew fewer words and more glances. Yet jokes survived, even a kind of sweetness. When a runner brought a tin of condensed milk, they dipped by turns, and the sharp sweetness made their jaws ache and their eyes smart. "So this is how the rich live," Hai said, and even Ta laughed. Orders came and went like weather. "Hold here. Shift left by 50 meters. Send two forward. Keep your heads. Keep your heads." They obeyed without drama. When the flare popped absurdly in daylight, they flattened. When the machine gun searched like a blind finger, they were not there. They went and returned, intact or missing a man, and counted softly in the dark. Once, sent forward, Kong and Bin crawled through sharp grass and oily water. They reached a low wall and raised their eyes. A truck, burned to its skeleton, stood in the road. Farther off, a small pagoda. The bell tower had fallen. The bell itself was split and dumb. "Remember this," Bin whispered. "If we don't, no one will. On the way back, Quang saw a boy face down in water, sugarcane still in his teeth. He reached. Bin caught his wrist. No, if he belongs to someone, he returns in their way. If to no one, then to the river. He belongs to a mother, Quang said. Then say her name softly, Bin told him, and keep moving. That evening, a brief lull opened. Unbelievable, like a mercy the war had not meant to grant. They heated a kettle and ate dry rice that turned to paste. Sen polished his glasses with a corner of shirt that could not possibly be clean. You pretended not to be the youngest. Ta checked each man's kit with hands that were always sure. Night brought the ordered crossing. Pontoons were pushed out. Boats lay black and low. The current felt slow until you were in it. Then it pulled at boot and belt. They passed a drift of leaves, a helmet, a plank, the curve of a hand that might have been a root. Eyes on the far bank, Ta murmured. They kept them there and reached it. The southern bank rose steeply. Clay slicked under fingernails. Someone coughed. Someone swallowed it. At the top, a shallow scrape, a crater. This is ours. They made it so, by lying in it, by measuring it with their rib cages, by raising their rifles to the lip, by taking aim and then not firing because nothing yet moved. Dawn seeped into drizzle. They were 6 clods in a shallow trench. Bin sketched on anything that would take a mark, the angle of a broken roof, Ta's squat silhouette, Sen's lenses, Tu's bitten lip, Hai's bent back, Kong's hands. Where is the beauty in that? Ta grunted. If we don't draw it, it will be as if it never was, Bin said. That would be uglier. Messages walked the trench. Hold. Reinforcements at night. Until then, be the wall. Then we will be stone, Sen said. Stone that breathes. Ta touched his shoulder once, and that was answer enough. The enemy probed, first in squads, then in lines, then in armor, nosing like bad animals. Planes screamed low. Artillery walked the bank, feeling for them like a blind giant. They held. When night brought a thin calm like skin on cooling soup, they counted softly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They began again. During one lull, Ta crawled and touched each shoulder. Still breathing? Nod. Blink. Good. Tomorrow again. A man could live by that, and by a ghost note that rose when Quang blew through a bent mouthpiece, and the old wall seemed to take it in as if it had lungs of its own. Elsewhere, among ruined houses, a young woman moved with a bucket and a stack of bandages. Her white blouse was the color of dust and brick and blood. She steadied trembling cups at cracked lips. From time to time she lifted her eyes toward the citadel, as if some strand of her spirit were moored there. Quang stepped into the doorway, beret at his belt, face hollowed by sleeplessness, hands still fine and steady. He did not smile. He lifted a stretcher and walked beside her. Words would not bear the weight. They worked in silence. Once, their fingers brushed on the pole, and something passed between them that had survived fire. They worked until moonrise, and parted at first light without a word. She tucked her scarf under her breast flap, breathed once, and went back inside. He folded his map, set his jaw, and went the other way. The second week burned harder. Shells raked the trench, tore the lip, sprayed them with dust and chips. A man could not straighten his back without drawing fire. The air stank of powder and clay and sweat. They breathed it as if it were air and nothing more. Hunger pressed. Rations thinned to a handful of rice, a crust. They chewed leaves, sucked pebbles. A boy from another squad was caught trying to gnaw raw cassava. He grinned, teeth bloody, and swallowed. Good enough. Sen wrote it down. So they will know, he said. Thirst was worse. Canteens were emptied at night and filled again with river water that stank of mud and cordite. They strained it through cloth, drank it hot. If I live long enough to taste clear water again, I muttered, I will drink until I drown. Sleep came only in snatches. Flares tore it away, shells chased it off. Nightmares filled what little was left. They learned to rest with eyes open, bodies slack but ready to spring. Quang once dreamed he was playing a saxophone in a garden. He woke with his fingers moving, lips pressed to the dented mouthpiece, breathless. Letters came in handfuls, damp and thumbed. A scrap in a girl's hand, a photo, a pressed leaf. 2 read his aloud, 3 words only. Still alive, waiting. He folded it again and again until it was soft as cloth. He tucked it under his belt and patted it like a charm. They became part of the ground itself. The trench was their skin, the earth their bones, the river their breath. They knew when a plane would come before the sound, when the flare would pop before it rose. They moved without words, 6 shadows in one shape. In one assault, the enemy broke close, helmets bobbing, boots splashing, fire cracking. Ta's voice cut. Wait. They waited until the faces were near enough to see the whites of the eyes. Then they fired. Men fell into the water, into the trench, into each other. The squad did not move. They fired until the barrel burned. When silence came, they were still 6. Afterward they lay flat, listening to their own hearts. No one spoke of the dead who lay draped on the wire, of the bodies in the mud. Been sketched, anyway. A boot, a hand, a helmet split. He said nothing, only drew. At dusk a thin rain began. It slicked the helmets, darkened the uniforms, turned the earth to paste. The squad tilted their faces upward, mouths open. The drops tasted of smoke, but also of sky. For a moment they drank and were silent. Night deepened. Voices drifted from the enemy side, snatches of song, a curse, a laugh. Kuong listened, hearing not hatred but the sound of men too young to be enemies. He lay with his hands over the dented mouthpiece, feeling the ghost of a note that might have crossed even this river. In the infirmary trench, Tan bent over stretchers. Her hands were cracked, nails broken, blouse stiff with old blood. She whispered names to men whose mouths could no longer form them. Some answered with a blink, some with nothing. She wiped their faces anyway. Once, she looked up and saw Kuong on the opposite bank, dark against darker. He lifted a hand. She did not wave back, but she held his gaze until a flare fell between them like a curtain. Then both turned back to their tasks. Kuong appeared again, mud to his waist, eyes hollow. He dropped beside her, lifted a wounded man, bore the stretcher with her. He spoke at last. "Why do you stay?" She answered, "Why do you fight?" Neither replied again. They worked until the sky paled. At dawn, the squad counted again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Ta nodded. "Good. Today we are stone again." The third week was a blur of fire. Planes came in, screaming. Bombs churned the river. Shells plowed the trench until no shape remained. The squad clung to what little cover was left, pressed flat as paper. When the barrage lifted, they raised their heads, and were still 6. Reinforcements filtered through at night, faces pale, eyes wide. The veterans of Ta's squad looked at them and almost smiled. "Welcome," Sen said simply. The new men crouched, trembling, learning the ground inch by inch. Some would not last until dawn. Hunger sharpened further. They scraped the last rice from the pot, chewed husks, swallowed smoke. Hai muttered that he dreamed of soup and awoke licking his fingers. Ta looked away, but said nothing. Disease crept in, fever, rot in the feet, coughs that tore the chest. Still the squad moved, loaded, fired, held. Tan passed among them, her face paler now, hair damp with sweat that never dried. She pressed herbs into mouths, bound cloth around sores, and carried on. Quang returned from a mission, uniform scorched, beret gone. He sat a moment with her in the dim light. His voice was low. "I no longer know what side I stand on. Only that I still breathe." She did not answer. She poured water into a cup, steadied his hand as he drank. They did not speak again. The river itself seemed weary. Its surface lay dull, broken only by wreckage and bodies. Once, at dusk, Quang thought he heard music in the ripple of reeds. He raised the mouthpiece and blew a note. It was thin, cracked, almost nothing. But Tan, somewhere in the ruins, paused and smiled faintly. Night again. The squad dug deeper, stacked earth, mended wire. They spoke little. Ta touched each man's shoulder in turn. "Still breathing?" Nod. Blink. "Good. Tomorrow again." Dawn spread gray. Smoke lay across the flats. The squad sat shoulder to shoulder, chewing dry rice. "A story?" Tu asked. Ta answered, "The story where we cross and return." They ate, strapped packs, lifted rifles, breathed. The day began. Elsewhere, Quang sat astride a motorbike, a map on his knee. The girl stood before him, eyes steady enough to dazzle. He smiled bitterly. "As you wish." "I've never met anyone who looked at me like that. Because of it, I hope we meet again, and also hope we never meet as enemies. If war does not consume me first. Take care, goodbye." He left the bike, vaulted across the road, slipped into the burned woods, his tall, supple figure flickering like a wild animal returning to its unit. She frowned as she watched, his silhouette vanishing suddenly like a mirage. She shook her head slightly, not understanding. Chapter 7. The guns found the river again. Shells smashed into the banks of the Thạch Hãn. Water leapt, trunks split. Smoke rose and spread until it seemed the sky itself might cave in. Yet the trench still held to the earth, and the squad still crouched inside it. 6 shadows pressed close, breathing like one body. They stopped counting hours. They measured time by barrages and lulls, by the faces left when the smoke thinned. At first light, Ta would reach along the trench and touch each shoulder in turn. Kong, Bin, Sen, Hai, Tu. Himself last, as if to borrow a little life from each man. Still breathing? A nod, a blink. Good. Then the day would begin again, the same and never the same. Powder, clay, the iron taste of blood. These settled on the tongue and would not wash away. The flare washed the world to bone white. Then the dark fell like a lid. A plane came low and tore a roof open with one sweep. Somewhere a bell from a small pagoda lay on its side in the weeds, split clean through. No one touched it. Kyung kept the bent saxophone mouthpiece at his ribs. Sometimes he pressed it to his lips and breathed without sound, the way a man prays. Tan moved through the broken lanes with a bucket and a roll of bandage, her scarf the color of ash. She lifted heads to drink, tied splints, whispered names back to mouths that could not form them. When she crossed the ruined street, she glanced toward the citadel, as if a fine thread of herself were tied there. Orders came and went like weather. Hold the lip, shift left 2 trench lengths, send 2 forward at dusk, count ammunition, count again. They obeyed without talk. When the flare burst absurdly in daylight, they were already down. When the machine gun searched like a blind hand, they were not there. At a signal they moved, 6 shadows rising as one, 6 shadows vanishing the same way. Once Kong and Bin crawled through grass that sliced the wrists and water that smelled of oil. At a low wall they raised their eyes. A truck burned to the frame stood crooked in the road. Farther, a small pagoda hunched against the pale sky. The bell tower was down. The bell itself lay dumb in the weeds. "Remember this," Bin whispered. "If we don't, it will be as if it never was." Kong nodded and pressed the image inside himself like a seal. On the way back they passed a boy, face down in the water with sugarcane still between his teeth. Kong reached. Bin caught his wrist. "If he belongs to someone, he will return in their way." "If to no one, then to the river," Kong whispered. "He belongs to a mother." "Then say her name softly," Bin said, "and keep moving." They did. The second week burned harder. Shells walked the parapet and pared it away. Chips stung cheeks. Dirt poured into eyes and mouths. A man could not straighten his back without drawing fire. Rain slicked the helmets and turned the ground to paste. They tilted their faces up and drank with open mouths. The drops tasted of smoke and, underneath that, of sky. Hunger pressed. Rations thinned to a handful of rice and a crust. They scraped the pot with a twig, chewed until their jaws ached, and swallowed. Thirst was worse. At night they filled canteens with river water that stank of mud and cordite, strained it through cloth, and drank it hot. Hai muttered that when clear water came again, he would drink until he drowned. No one laughed. Then Sen said, "Write that down." And they did laugh. Once. Quick. Like a cough that didn't hurt. Sleep came in scraps. Flares tore it. Shells chased it away. Nightmares filled what little was left. They learned to rest with eyes open, bodies slack but ready to spring. Kong dreamed of the botanical gardens, of a bench in shade. He woke with his fingers moving, lips on the dented mouthpiece, breathless. Letters arrived damp and thumbed, passed from hand to hand as if they were warmth. Twos had only 3 words, still alive. Waiting. He folded it until it felt like cloth, and kept it under his belt like a charm. Hai showed a photo of a child with a milk mustache and said nothing. Sen wrote small histories on scraps no rain could find. The afternoon the rain tasted sweet. The hour Ta said nothing and yet said enough. The way Bin drew the curve of a broken roof with a pencil stub that had more life than it should. At dusk the enemy pressed, helmets bobbing, boots throwing water, fire rattling like nails in a pan. Wait, Ta said. They held until faces came close enough to see the whites of the eyes. Then they fired. Short, cold, exact. Men fell into the trench, into the water, into each other. Silence returned like a blow. They lay flat and listened to their hearts beat in the ground. No one spoke of the dead hanging on the wire. Bin drew a boot, a hand, a helmet split clean through, and shut the book. In the infirmary trench, Tan's hands were split and her nails torn. She whispered names to mouths that could not form them. Some answered with a blink. Some answered with nothing. She wiped faces anyway. Kwang came mud to his waist, eyes hollow with sleeplessness, and lifted a stretcher beside her without a word. Once their fingers touched the same pole and stopped. "Why do you stay?" he asked at last. "Why do you fight?" she returned. Neither answered. They worked until the sky paled. Armor nosed forward. Planes dropped until the river itself heaved. The town folded and opened like dark bread under a knife. The citadel shuddered, but stood. The squad fired until barrels burned, cooled them in river water, and fired again. Their ears rang and their eyes blurred, but their hands never shook. At night, under a lid of smoke, Kong raised the mouthpiece and let out a single thin sound. It was almost nothing, and yet far off Tan paused, head tilted, as if she had indeed heard it. Reinforcements slid in by night, faces pale, eyes wide, boots too clean. Ta nodded once. Welcome. They crouched, shivering, and learned the ground inch by inch. By dawn some were gone, borne along the same trench, boots dragging. Sen wrote their names where he could and pressed the scraps into a dry place no rain could find. Disease crept in, a fever that burned low, feet that rotted in the wet, coughs that tore the chest. Tan pressed bitter herbs into mouths and tied clean cloth where there was any to be had. Kwang returned scorched from a mission, beret gone. He sat a minute with her in the dim light. "I no longer know what side I stand on," he said, "only that I still breathe." She steadied his hand while he drank and then rose and carried on. The river darkened with wreckage and bodies. Still the crossings went on, boats nosed out, paddles wrapped, ropes ready. Rafts were lashed. Men clutched rifles to their chests and let the current carry them slantwise across. Sometimes the water tilted under their weight, as if the river itself breathed for them. Sometimes it opened and did not close. Those on the bank waited, ready to pull, to cover, to go in their turn. Each return was counted not by cheer but by breath released. There were hours of a strange, stubborn gentleness. A runner brought a tin of condensed milk. 6 spoons appeared as if conjured. They dipped in turn, and the sharp sweetness made their jaws ache and their eyes sting. "So this is how the rich live," Hai said. Even Ta laughed. Once, quickly, like a harmless cough. Nights slid into days, The citadel loomed, battered brick, scarred wall, unbroken. The squad bent their backs, clenched their teeth, and lived each hour as if it were both the first and the last. Digging when digging was possible, firing when firing was needed, lying still when stillness alone kept them alive. They spoke little, and what they said was mostly with a hand laid briefly on a sleeve, a glance that weighed and then released. Sometimes, in a lull, Ta crawled and touched each shoulder. Still breathing? Nod, blink. Good. Tomorrow again. A man could live on that, and on the single, faint thread of a note that seemed to hang above the trench after Quang blew, as if the old wall had lungs of its own. At the edge of town, a woman carried a child past a crater and did not run. A dog watched from a doorway with one ear up. In the reeds, a cap snagged and turned slow circles, as if remembering a head that was no longer there. The wind shifted toward the end of the month. Smoke crawled lower to the ground. Orders came in a handful of words. Hold reinforcements at night. Until then, be the wall. Then we will be stone, Sen said. Stone that breathes. Ta pressed his shoulder once. That was answer enough. At dawn, the sky lifted pale. The trench smelled of wet earth and cold ash. The squad sat shoulder to shoulder and chewed dry rice that turned to paste. A story, Tu asked, around a mouthful. Ta tilted his head. The one where we cross and come back. They ate, strapped on their packs, lifted their rifles, and breathed. Elsewhere, Quang sat astride a motorbike with a map across his knee. The girl stood before him, eyes steady until he squinted as if dazzled. He smiled bitterly. As you wish. I've never met anyone who looked at me like that. Because of it, I hope we meet again, and also hope we never stand as enemies across a line. If the war does not swallow me first. Take care. Goodbye. He left the bike, vaulted the road, and slipped into the burned woods, his tall, supple figure flickering like a wild animal returning to its unit. She frowned as she watched. His silhouette vanished suddenly like a mirage. She shook her head slightly, not understanding. And always, at first light, Ta touched each shoulder in turn. Still breathing? A nod, a blink, a faint smile that was not quite a smile. 6 shadows rose again, rifles in hand, and the day began.